Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. Lockers slammed shut, sneakers squeaked against the polished floor, and laughter echoed off the walls. Amidst the chaos, a tall, broad-shouldered figure weaved through the crowd with effortless grace. "Watch it, dude!" a voice called out as the figure nearly collided with a group of freshmen. "Sorry, man," the athletic teen replied, flashing a winning smile that made a nearby group of girls swoon. Stephen Thompson was the epitome of high school popularity, captain of the football team, blessed with movie star good looks and an easy charm that won over teachers and students alike. He high-fived his teammates as he passed, winked at a few admirers, and generally owned the hallway like it was his personal red carpet. But as he rounded the corner, his confident stride faltered. There, standing by her locker, was Tabitha Green, the school's resident oddball. While other girls fawned over the latest fashion trends and celebrity gossip, Tabitha buried herself in thick books on quantum physics and obscure historical events. Her wild, unkempt hair and thick-rimmed glasses only added to her reputation as the school weirdo. Stephen's friends had often joked about Tabitha's crush on him, but he'd always brushed it off. Sure, he'd caught her staring at him in class more than once, but he figured she was just daydreaming or something. No way she'd actually work up the nerve to talk to him. He was wrong. Stephen? Tabitha's voice was barely above a whisper as she approached him. "Can I talk to you for a second?" Stephen glanced around, hoping none of his teammates were witnessing this interaction. Yeah, I guess. What's up?" Tabitha took a deep breath, her cheeks flushing crimson. "Well, I was wondering if you're not busy, if you'd like to go to the movies with me this weekend?" The hallway seemed to grow eerily quiet, though Stephen knew it was just his imagination. He stared at Tabitha, dumbfounded. Was she seriously asking him out? Him, Stephen Thompson, star quarterback and most popular guy in school? "Look, Tabitha," he began, trying to let her down gently. "You're nice and all, but I don't think that's gonna work out. We're just different, you know?" Tabitha's face fell, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Oh, I see. I just thought—" "Yeah, well, you thought wrong," Stephen cut her off, his voice harsher than he'd intended. "Maybe stick to your books, okay? Leave the dating to people who actually know how to talk to other humans." As soon as the words left his mouth, Stephen regretted them. He wasn't usually cruel, but something about Tabitha's forwardness had thrown him off balance. He watched as she hurried away, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Harsh, dude." His best friend Mark appeared at his side. "But I get it. Can't have weird science tagging along to parties, right?" Stephen forced a laugh, but something uncomfortable settled in the pit of his stomach. He shook it off, heading to his next class and pushing thoughts of Tabitha from his mind. The next morning, Stephen woke up feeling off. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but something felt different. As he stumbled to the bathroom, still groggy from sleep, he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror and froze. "What the hell?" he muttered, leaning closer to his reflection. His face looked softer somehow. The sharp angles of his jaw seemed less defined, and was it his imagination, or did his eyelashes look longer? He shook his head, chalking it up to a bad night's sleep. But as the days passed, the changes became harder to ignore. His clothes started to feel loose, hanging off his frame in a way they never had before. He could have sworn he was getting shorter, too. When he mentioned it to his mom, she just laughed. "Don't be silly, honey. Boys your age don't shrink. You're probably just slouching more. Stand up straight." Stephen tried to brush it off, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. His voice started cracking more often, rising to a higher pitch that made his teammates snicker during practice. "Yo, Thompson!" his coach barked during a particularly grueling session. "What's with the squeaky voice? You turning into a mouse or something?" The team erupted in laughter, and Stephen felt his face burn with embarrassment. He threw himself into the drills with renewed vigor, determined to prove he was still the same star athlete he'd always been. But his body seemed to have other ideas. His movements felt off, his coordination deteriorating by the day. Passes that used to be effortless now sailed wide of their targets. His once powerful sprints turned into awkward jogs.
"Maybe you should see a doctor,"
his mother suggested one evening, concern etched on her face.
"This doesn't seem normal, sweetie."
Stephen wanted to argue, to insist he was fine, but deep down he knew she was right. Something was seriously wrong with him, and it was time to face it head-on. The doctor's office was cold and sterile, the smell of disinfectant making Stephen's stomach churn. Or maybe that was just nerves. He fidgeted on the exam table, the paper crinkling loudly beneath him. "Well, Mr. Thompson," Dr. Patel entered the room, a puzzled expression on his face as he studied a chart. "I have to say, I've never seen anything quite like this before." Stephen's heart raced. "What is it? What's wrong with me?" The doctor sighed, taking a seat across from him. "According to these tests, your hormone levels they're drastically changing. Your testosterone is plummeting while your estrogen levels are skyrocketing. It's as if your body is, for lack of a better term, feminizing itself." The room spun around Stephen. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a mistake, a bad dream he'd wake up from any second. But how? He stammered. "Why?" Dr. Patel shook his head. "I'm afraid I don't have an answer for you. This isn't a known medical condition. We'll need to run more tests, consult with specialists. In the meantime, we can try hormone therapy to counteract the changes, but I can't guarantee it will work." Stephen left the doctor's office in a daze, his mind reeling. How was he supposed to explain this to his friends, his teammates? How could he face everyone at school knowing his body was betraying him like this? The next few weeks were a blur of tests, appointments, and fruitless attempts at treatment. Nothing seemed to slow the inexorable march of changes overtaking Stephen's body. His hair grew longer and softer, his skin smoother. His hips widened as his waist narrowed, giving him a distinctly feminine silhouette. He withdrew from his friends, skipping practices and ignoring texts. How could he face them like this? He overheard whispers in the hallways, cruel jokes about his appearance, and speculation about what was happening to him. "I heard he's on some weird diet." "Nah, man, it's gotta be drugs or something." "Maybe he's doing it on purpose. You know, like those guys who dress up as chicks?" Each comment cut deeper than the last. Stephen felt like he was losing himself piece by piece. The person he saw in the mirror each morning became more and more of a stranger. It was his mother who finally sat him down one evening, her eyes filled with a mix of concern and determination. "Stephen, honey," she began, taking his hands in hers. "I know this is scary and confusing, but fighting it's tearing you apart. Maybe it's time we consider accepting this change." Stephen stared at her, incredulous. "Accept it? Mom, I'm turning into a girl. How am I supposed to accept that?" She squeezed his hands gently. "I know it seems impossible right now, but sweetheart, you're still you. No matter what your body looks like, you're still my child. And I love you, no matter what." Tears welled up in Stephen's eyes, spilling over as he collapsed into his mother's arms. For the first time since this nightmare began, he let himself truly break down, sobbing uncontrollably as she held him close. In the days that followed, Stephen, with his mother's unwavering support, began the difficult process of embracing his new identity. They went shopping for clothes that actually fit his changing body. He let his hair grow out, learning to style it in ways that framed his softening features. And together they chose a new name, Helen. The transition wasn't easy. There were still days when Helen looked in the mirror and felt a pang of loss for the person she used to be. But slowly, gradually, she began to find comfort in her new skin. To her surprise, not everyone at school reacted with cruelty. A group of girls who had never given Stephen a second glance reached out to Helen, offering friendship and support. They taught her about makeup, helped her navigate the treacherous waters of female social dynamics, and stood by her side when others whispered or stared. "Don't let them get to you," her new friend Megan insisted one day as they walked to class, ignoring the pointed looks from a group of jocks. "They're just jealous because you're prettier than half the girls in school now." Helen laughed, a sound that still sometimes surprised her with its light melodic quality. "I don't know about that." "Trust me," Megan grinned, linking their arms. "You're a total babe. Own it, girl." As her body continued to change, Helen discovered new talents she never knew she possessed. Her once clumsy movements became graceful and fluid. On a whim, she tried out for the cheerleading squad and was shocked when she made the cut. "You're a natural!" the coach exclaimed after watching Helen nail a complicated routine. "Where have you been hiding those moves all this time?" But the most surprising change came in the classroom. As Stephen, academics had always been a struggle. He'd coasted by on his athletic prowess, knowing a sports scholarship was his only real shot at college. But Helen found herself suddenly grasping concepts that had once seemed impossibly complex. Math problems that used to make her head spin now unraveled with ease. Literature she'd dismissed as boring suddenly came alive with hidden meanings and beautiful language. Even sciences like physics and chemistry, which Stephen had barely passed, now fascinated Helen. Her teachers were stunned by the transformation. "It's like a completely different student," she overheard her English teacher telling the principal one day. "I've never seen such a dramatic improvement." As her grades soared, so did Helen's confidence. She threw herself into her studies with the same determination she'd once applied to football practice. And when it came time to apply for colleges, she set her sights higher than she ever would have dared as Stephen. The day the letter arrived from MIT, Helen's hands shook as she tore open the envelope. Her mother hovered nearby, practically vibrating with nervous energy. "Well?" she demanded. "What does it say?" Helen's eyes scanned the page, growing wider with each line. I got in," she whispered, then louder. "I got in! And they're offering me a full scholarship!" Her mother squealed with delight, pulling Helen into a bone-crushing hug. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so proud of you." As they celebrated that night, Helen couldn't help but marvel at the strange twist her life had taken. If someone had told Stephen Thompson he'd end up as a girl headed to MIT on an academic scholarship, he would have laughed in their face. But here she was, embracing a future she never could have imagined. The years that followed, Helen threw herself into her studies at MIT, excelling in ways that continued to surprise even herself. She found herself drawn to the field of endocrinology, fascinated by the intricate dance of hormones that had so dramatically altered her own life. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments of doubt, days when she questioned everything. But Helen had learned to face her challenges head-on, drawing strength from the support of her friends and family. She made new friends in college, a diverse group of brilliant minds who accepted her without question. And it was through one of these friends that she met Thomas, a kind-hearted graduate student in the robotics program. Their romance blossomed slowly, built on a foundation of shared interests and mutual respect. Thomas never made Helen feel self-conscious about her past. Instead, he marveled at her journey, often telling her how much he admired her courage and resilience. After graduation, Helen pursued her PhD, determined to unravel the mysteries of the human endocrine system. Her unique perspective and personal experience gave her insights that led to groundbreaking research. She published papers, spoke at conferences, and quickly made a name for herself in the scientific community. And through it all, Thomas remained by her side, her rock and her biggest cheerleader. When he proposed on a moonlit beach 5 years after they first met, Helen's yes was immediate and heartfelt. Their wedding was a joyous celebration of love and family. Helen's mother, who had stood by her through every step of her transformation, beamed with pride as she walked her daughter down the aisle. Friends from high school and college mingled with colleagues and new acquaintances, all there to support the happy couple. As Helen stood hand in hand with Thomas, reciting her vows, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. The journey hadn't been easy, but every struggle, every tear, every moment of doubt had led her to this point. She was exactly where she was meant to be. In the years that followed, Helen's career continued to flourish. She became a respected authority in her field, her research paving the way for new treatments and therapies. She and Thomas built a life together, eventually welcoming 2 beautiful children into their family. Sometimes late at night, Helen would find herself thinking back to that day in high school when Tabitha Green had approached Stephen Thompson in the hallway. She often wondered what had become of the shy, awkward girl who had unwittingly set this whole extraordinary chain of events in motion. Part of her wanted to reach out, to thank Tabitha for the strange gift she had given her. But another part worried that dredging up the past might only cause pain. In the end, Helen decided that some mysteries were best left unsolved. Instead, she focused on the future, on her research, which held the potential to help countless others struggling with hormone imbalances, on her family, watching with pride as her children grew and flourished, and on herself, continually amazed by the twists and turns life could take. One day, Helen found herself back in her hometown for a conference. The streets felt both familiar and foreign as she drove past old haunts, memories flooding back with each turn. On a whim, she decided to swing by her old high school. The building looked smaller than she remembered, the once imposing facade now almost quaint. She parked her car and wandered the grounds, lost in thought. "Can I help you?" Helen turned to find an older woman watching her curiously. The lines on her face spoke of years of laughter and worry, but there was something familiar about her eyes. "I'm just visiting," Helen explained. "I used to go to school here, years ago." The woman's face lit up. "Oh, how wonderful. I've been teaching here for over 3 decades now. Perhaps we crossed paths? I'm Miss Green?" Helen's breath caught in her throat. Tabitha Green, the shy, awkward girl who had set her extraordinary journey in motion all those years ago. "Miss Green," Helen repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. I think we did know each other, actually, though you might not recognize me now." Tabitha's brow furrowed as she studied Helen's face. "I'm sorry, I used to be Stephen Thompson," Helen said softly. The color drained from Tabitha's face. She stumbled back a step, her hand flying to her mouth. "Stephen? But how?" Helen gave a rueful smile. "It's a long story, one I'm still trying to understand myself, if I'm being honest." Tabitha's eyes filled with tears. "Oh God, Stephen, I mean Helen, I'm so sorry. That day in the hallway when I asked you out, I was so embarrassed, so hurt by your rejection. I wished something would happen to make you understand how it felt to be different, to be an outsider." A chill ran down Helen's spine. "You wished for this?" Tabitha shook her head vehemently. "Not this specifically. I wanted you to know what it was like to not fit in. I never imagined. I'm so sorry, Helen. Can you ever forgive me?" Helen was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation. Finally, she reached out and took Tabitha's trembling hands in her own. "There's nothing to forgive," she said gently. "Whatever caused this change, it gave me a life I never could have imagined. I'm happier and more fulfilled than I ever was as Stephen." Tabitha's tears spilled over, but a relieved smile spread across her face. "Really?" Helen nodded. "Really? In fact, I've often thought about reaching out to thank you. Your courage that day. It set me on a path I never could have foreseen, but one I'm incredibly grateful for." The 2 women embraced, years of unspoken emotions flowing between them. When they finally parted, both were laughing and wiping away tears. "Would you like to grab a coffee?" Tabitha asked. "I'd love to hear more about your life if you're willing to share." Helen smiled warmly. "I'd like that very much." As they walked toward the nearby cafe, Helen felt a sense of closure she hadn't realized she'd been missing. Whatever strange magic or cosmic coincidence had transformed her life, she was at peace with it. She had found her true self, her purpose, and a happiness she never could have imagined as the arrogant teenager she once was. Life, Helen mused as she and Tabitha settled into a cozy booth, had a way of working out in the most unexpected ways, and she, for one, wouldn't have it any other way. The hours flew by as Helen and Tabitha caught up, sharing stories of their lives over the past 2 decades. Helen learned that Tabitha had never left their hometown, dedicating her life to teaching and mentoring students who, like her younger self, felt like outsiders. "I always hoped I could make a difference," Tabitha admitted, stirring her 3rd cup of coffee. "That I could help kids feel less alone, less weird." Helen reached across the table, squeezing Tabitha's hand. "You did make a difference. You changed my life in ways neither of us could have imagined." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cafe, Helen's phone buzzed. A text from Thomas. "Hope the conference is going well. The kids say goodnight and that they love you to the moon and back." A warm smile spread across Helen's face as she typed a quick reply. When she looked up, she found Tabitha watching her with a knowing expression. "You really are happy, aren't you?" Tabitha asked softly. Helen nodded, her eyes shining. "More than I ever thought possible." As they said their goodbyes outside the cafe, promising to keep in touch, Helen felt a surge of gratitude for the twists and turns that had brought her to this moment. She hugged Tabitha tightly, whispering a heartfelt "thank you" before they parted ways. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.